So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our third and final segment of the Jewish Federation, Missouri Foundation for Health, and United Way joint fundraising recalibration webinar series. We three funders are very excited about partnering on this series and hope that the presentations to date have been resourceful to you as we all look and move into the months ahead. I'm Julie Simon. I'm the Director of Agency Capacity Building Initiatives at the United Way of Greater St. Louis. United Way is proud to have served our communities for 95 plus years with an unwavering commitment to the region and vision for a better future. During this unprecedented time, United Way, like our co-sponsors, continue to stand with our St. Louis communities, working extensively to help people live their best possible lives. We do much more than grant funds across our region. Given our deep commitment to providing capacity building support, we're honored to join this sponsorship. I have a brief request of you who are attending today's webinar. You'll receive within the next couple days session materials along with a link to a brief survey, which we ask you to complete so that we, much like you do with your programs, can assess the value of this session and continue to offer you opportunities that best meet your needs. Next up, we have Brian Herstig, President and CEO of the Jewish Federation of St. Louis.
Well, thank you, Julie. And I just want to echo what you said before. This really has been a wonderful collaboration between the Federation, the Missouri Foundation for Health, and the United Way. And I also just want to thank and point out Wendy Dyer and Kate Dana, who've really done a masterful job in their presentations, preparing and presenting information that is new to all of us, because this situation is completely new to all of us. While the Jewish Federation has been around for 120 years, so I guess was around during the Spanish flu pandemic of 100 years ago, a lot has changed in that time. And today we invest in more than 100 institutions and programs here in Israel and around the world. But our most vital role probably is as a convener of bringing leaders together of the organizations that we work with and across the community to share information, collaborate on issues, and discuss paths forward. That's exactly what we are all doing here today, specifically focused on fundraising, but bringing together the community and figuring out ways jointly together to move forward this community, this region, and this state. So I just want to thank everyone who's participating and who helped make this happen for all of their hard work. And now I'd like to call on Jessie LaRose from the Missouri Foundation for Health.
Thank you, Brian. I'm Jessie LaRose. I'm a senior strategist with the Missouri Foundation for Health, and we have been very excited and honored to participate in these three seminars as well, and the collaboration between all three of us will hopefully continue. Missouri Foundation for Health is dedicated to improving the health and well-being of individuals and communities most in need. We are a catalyst for change and a resource for the region, improving the health and well-being of Missourians through partnership, funding, experience, and knowledge and expertise. We serve 84 counties in the state of Missouri and the city of St. Louis, and we remain steadfast in our commitment to ensure Missourians have the services and support they need to stay healthy, including collaborating with others to find ways to support nonprofits and the public health social infrastructure during this challenging and uncertain time. Now I pitch it back to Julie to introduce our presenters.
Thank you, Jessie. As we've requested previously during this webinar, please pose your questions in the Q&A function instead of the chat section, which has been disabled. I'll be monitoring this section and hopefully we'll have time to pose your questions and receive responses to at least a few at the end of the presentation. If not, Wendy and Kate will be answering your questions in follow-up emails we will send to you all. So without further delay, here are Wendy Dyer, Fund Development Consultants, Wendy Dyer and Kate Dana.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Dana. Welcome to our third and final webinar in the recalibration series. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we're talking about ideas to improve your donor communication to build stronger and more authentic relationships with your donors. And before we get started, we want to thank our amazing sponsors, the Jewish Federation of St. Louis, Missouri Foundation for Health, and United Way, who are bringing you this and so much other good work in St. Louis. And Wendy Dyer is here with me. So Wendy, do you want to say hi before we jump in?
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here for our final series and hope that you're finding them really helpful.
So today, our goal is to really focus on how you can authentically communicate with your donors. And we're emphasizing authentic because we know sometimes communications can feel awkward or a little forced. So our objectives today are to help you navigate these in a couple of ways. First is by recognizing some of the shortcomings of our typical style of donor communications. Second, understanding what donors say they want in communications with nonprofits, and learn to use which emotions you want to use in communications and which are best avoided. We also want to inspire you to create your own narrative about how your organization has been affected by and is handling the COVID and other situations caused by COVID in order to kind of take control of your own story and prevent someone else from doing it for you. So first, let's recap the first webinar. So in the first webinar, we covered scenario planning because this is a process that helps you get a sense of where your organization is heading. So as you think about communications, check in with your scenario plans and think about what new you have to share, if new directions have come out of your scenario planning process or new ideas. What do you know that your donors don't? That's an important thing. We always know what's going on inside of our organizations and a lot more about our work than donors do. So that was the first webinar. In the second and most recent webinar, we looked at development planning and especially emphasized the fact that most of our communications, most of our donations come from a fairly small set of donors. So that doesn't mean you don't love and respect all of your donors, but your time is limited and you really want to know where you need to focus most of your efforts. So you want to check in and make sure you're operating under the right type of funding model. We covered those funding models from the Stanford Social Innovation Review, and identify where most of your funding is coming from and should be coming from, which donors represent 75% or more of your revenue, and plot them out on that gift table and really take a look at them and spend some time each week thinking about how to communicate with them.
Very nice. Thank you, Kate. So
Sure.
The reality is when we don't have good donor communication with our donors, we've got a dreadful retention problem. So national averages of retention is 40% right now. So it's important for you to know what yours is. That would help you plan accordingly. But what people are anticipating is a plummeting to a 20% retention that lies ahead. And when you really think about the reality of that, can you imagine replacing 80% of your donors every year? That would be just an extremely difficult task. A lot of fundraisers continue to focus on finding new donors, but what Kate and I would want to challenge you is, why search for new donors and if you're not doing outstanding stewardship to keep the ones that you already got? And keep in mind that keeping your current donors is way less expensive than finding new ones. Just by representative example here, major gift seeking typically will cost an organization 10 cents in effort or time for every dollar raised, versus finding a brand new donor. Actually, you're in a deficit situation. It costs you $1.25 in your time to find every dollar in new donors. So our time spent on stewardship is done through excellent donor communication, is always a far better investment than searching for something that you don't yet have. So at the start of the pandemic, everybody was told, talk to your donors, talk to your donors, talk to your donors. And what I fell in line with that for a bit, but then it dawned on me, you know, if you haven't, it's not that easy if you haven't really built in a culture of talking with your donors already. You can't just step in and talk to your donors. Donors by nature are rather suspicious because they only hear from us when we want money or when we need money. So I don't know if any of you remember, David Lucas had come here from Chicago probably about a decade ago to run the St. Louis Community Foundation for quite a while. And what he told me is what struck him most about our region was that there was not a built-in culture of real donor communication. And that really hit me at the time, and it's caused me to think about it since. And I don't think all these years later that we've really improved that very much. So before we dig into kind of the nitty-gritty of some tactical stuff on donor communication, I'd like to challenge everybody with just thinking about our behavior. If we changed our behavior, could we perhaps change our donors' behavior? So Kate, I have a question for you. Do you believe that our thoughts and feelings drive our behavior?
I absolutely do.
Okay, so here's a problem that I stumbled upon many years ago, and I've been trying to correct it ever since. All of us in fundraising have been taught certain language that we've grown up with. And I mean terms, we've all heard it, we all use it, terms like cultivate, solicit, pick the low-hanging fruit. And I can think of some of the books that really promoted that and how we got here and how it started this whole thing. But all of you are donors in some capacity, right? Do you want to have your favorite charity thinking of you as a piece of fruit? Kate, if you would be a piece of fruit, what fruit would you be?
I have no idea. I do not want to be a fruit.
Yeah, so I'd be a raspberry, I think. Kate and I are both gardeners, and in fact, she's a master gardener, but gardeners use the term cultivate. Are people something to cultivate? Or are they something to nurture? Solicit. Kate, what comes to mind when you hear the word solicit? You can be honest here.
I mean, what immediately comes to mind is prostitution.
How did we get stuck with these terms? And so what we're suggesting here is we don't use that with our donor. We don't say, Mrs. Jones, it's time for our annual solicitation lunch. Where do you want to meet me? We don't say that, but the point being, if you believe that our thoughts and feelings influence our behavior, that is how we are thinking about our donors. We are thinking about them very transactionally, as a piece of fruit, as something to manipulate. So if we were to use kinder, more respectful words like nurture, would we maybe get a different behavior from ourselves that would then be imparted into our donors? Kate, does that make sense?
It does. I mean, or words like engage or share information, or a lot of those positive things that you really want your donors for, seeking someone's opinion or input. I completely agree.
We're not in conflict. We're not here to manipulate our donors. We're here to build ties and join together in partnership to accomplish similar interests. So while we're at it and kind of ranting a little bit about that, and I, again, feel very strongly about it, a few years back, I found myself hammering out an email, and it started with, hey, I hope you're well. I hope you had a good weekend. I hope you got the proposal. I hope you liked the proposal. I hope to hear from you soon. And I thought, what is wrong with this email? And I started Googling some data on hope, and you can do this yourself. There's a lot of great stuff about hope, and I want to be clear. Being hopeful is a very important thing for us as human beings. But the point is here, If we talk about our behaviors and our outreach to our donors, it's so overused in fundraising. I believe it's possibly hurting your fundraising and how you are approaching your prospects and whatnot, because hope is not a strategy. It's absolutely not. Again, being hopeful is important, but hope is not a strategy. And I would like to just point out Boeing going after the next, what's the big fighter jet, Kate, F-15s?
They're probably up over F-15 or F-18 now, but they're always making a new one.
All right, so they're going after the new government contract through the Department of Defense for the next round of F-18 fighter jets. Do you really think they're sitting at their computer saying, "Dear Mr. Department or Mrs. Department of Defense, I hope you got our proposal. I hope that you'll buy our multi-million-dollar." No, they're not. So why are we using that powerless language in our fundraising? I believe it would change your behavior. So Kate, rumor has it that you are waiting on a decision about a $1 million gift, that you were part of a team working really hard on it. Is that right?
This is true.
Okay. All right. So let's have you do this little exercise on hope. I want you to just close your eyes.
Is everybody doing this along with me out there?
They sure can. So think of something that you really, really want in fundraising. In your case, Kate, it's the $1 million gift. So close your eyes, bow your head, and just say to yourself, boy, I hope we get that $1 million gift.
Okay.
How did it make you feel?
You know, it leaves me a little flat. It doesn't leave me with, it leaves me a little disempowered feeling, actually. Like I just am dependent on the universe to have that happen.
Right. Okay. And so that gets exuded as you think about this and reach out again to your prospects while you're waiting. So what might be a more empowering term that you might use just for your own thinking? Like, I look forward to.
Yeah, I look forward to, or I mean, just flipping it to, I know you're considering, like, what I want to do is reach out to that funder and say, I know you're considering this $1 million gift, and I want you to know that here's 3 more ways it's going to have a huge impact and really change the landscape for the people that we're talking about.
Sounds an awful lot more powerful than just sitting back and wishing and hoping behind your desk, right?
It does, yeah, absolutely.
So I just want to challenge everybody today, when you're next at your computer, just pay attention to how often you're using the word hope. Change it up, just swap it out with some other word that you like, and see if you start kind of changing how you're feeling and approaching your donors. All right, so the reality is we usually only talk with our donors when we need the money. The other day I had the pleasure of talking with a donor to a very nice organization, and this donor told me she was so thrilled when the development director called her, because the development director, upon receiving her gift, made a spontaneous phone call to thank her, and it made this donor feel extremely excited about having made that gift. That's powerful. So we shouldn't only call people when we need the money, or when a report is due, or when the corporate gift, when we want another sponsorship, or when we haven't heard from them. If any of you like shopping, Kate, are you a shopper?
A little bit of a shopper.
Okay, so and I hate shopping. If anybody wants to volunteer to be my personal shopper, I'll even pay you. Anyway, when you shop and buy something special, you get that satisfaction of making that purchase. We deprive donors of that satisfaction of that giving because there's too long of a lag time between when they made the gift and when we communicate with them. And after they've made the gift, we tend to leave them flat. And I know some of you probably call your donors right away, just like this example I gave. But in general, we're not doing that. So we're depriving our donors of the satisfaction and the very sincere pleasure of being givers. So the Association of Fundraising Professionals has a lovely publication. I hope that you all receive it. And they do a lot of good research, and I glam onto those things because research-based things they're powerful tools for us to always remember. And it's very simple. The AFP reports through multiple surveys with donors. What donors want is only 3 things. They want to be known and valued. They want to know where their money went, literally where you spent it, and they want to know the impact that their gift made. So people sometimes tend to blend where the money went and the impact it made. Say, for example, in a thank you letter, you can't possibly know the impact. You can know the impact it might make, but you can't possibly know the impact it makes in a thank you letter. So don't blend those 2 and 3, separate them, and use this research and these 3 things as your advantage that gives you an entree to do natural communication with your donors. And Kate's going to go over a couple examples in a couple slides.
Yeah, so that system, that understanding those 3 things that donors want, I think I've found, and I think you found too, Wendy, that it really helps you strategize and think about what information to communicate and when. And we're going to look at that in just a second. But I also think it's really important to plan our communications. How do we prepare to engage in communications? And Wendy and I talked about some of the things we do to plan communications. First of all, before you communicate, it's important to know that, and you've all had this experience, some donors will be receptive and some will not. And that's completely okay. Whether you're doing this in person or on a call, through email, you know, not everyone will want to engage in a conversation with you, and that's all right. But before you do engage in the communication, we think knowing what you want to share, knowing what information, what are the top couple things that you want to make sure that this donor is aware of, knowing what questions you'll ask. And I know we'll hit this a couple of times, but in any conversation with a donor, you know, it's best to have the donor talking about themselves. People like to talk about themselves. That's what makes them feel engaged and appreciated. And that's fabulous for you because you want to learn about how you can effectively partner with your supporter. They clearly have some passion about what you do because they were moved to make a gift. So you want to really take the time to learn that. And it's extremely helpful to know the reason for the next time you will be in touch, to think about that before. This is why having kind of a calendar of low-grade engagements event throughout the year can be helpful, or knowing what is coming up within your organization's calendar or programming that you might share with them, and kind of leaving that little seed with them about, oh, our gala is going to come up in a couple months and I will reach out to you to make sure you get an invitation. I'd love to see you there, or something like that. Doing that prevents the donor from kind of leaving it flat. You have to sort of start all over again. You're not opening a dialogue and a reason for communicating. If you're just calling them, communicating information, and hanging up, then you're sort of back to square one, right? Where you can't figure out quite how to start the process again. But hopefully by asking questions, you'll get some good information and good intel that'll help you really develop a closer relationship. After the call or the interaction, make sure you take really good notes. And that is actually a great time to plan what your next step will be. So to sit down with your gift table and look at your thoughts on that note, on that donor, and think it through. You want to make sure that you follow up as promised. So if you say you're going to do something, make sure that you do. And then keep that intel that you collect in your gift table so that you can use it on an ongoing basis or in your record on that donor.
I could just emphasize something. We were once working with a group, and they had the potential for $1 million gift. And the donor said, you know what, I got a lot of family stuff going on. Call me after little leagues or football starts. And people who have kids in football starts, I think, I don't know about this year, but 1st of August. And did the organization call him right after the 1st of August, even though he gave them permission and they agreed on when the follow-up was going to be? No, of course they didn't, because as you might remember from webinar number 2, development planning, people tend to do what they like to do. So it was easier for the organization to just get busy doing something else, probably a newsletter or something, and not get back to this donor when the donor had just given them permission about when to contact them. Finally got back in touch sometime much later that fall. The donor ultimately made a $300,000 gift. But this is why what Kate has, yeah, it's heartbreaking. But Kate, and no matter how much we try to emphasize, you got to do your follow-up. If you leave a meeting or a conversation with the donor, as Kate is suggesting, with their permission to follow up at XYZ, it makes your ultimate ask of them of something so easy, and it takes the fear out of the ask, because if you've gotten permission for continuing the conversation on your journey with the donor, you've got it made. So I just wanted to emphasize that.
It's a really good point. So once you're prepared and you have an idea of what you want to communicate and you're ready, it's those 3 steps that Wendy had mentioned on a couple slides back about the things that donors want, that can help guide the content or kind of the strategy of your communications. So here's this slide sort of lays out examples and text on these. And when you break it down, it's really not that scary. So as Wendy said, and I think this is always our best intention, but it often doesn't happen, calling immediately to say thank you, like immediately, like within the next day or 2 of getting the gift, especially if it's a significant gift, whether it is a grant funder or whether it is an individual donor, or especially a new donor, doing it immediately feels natural to both of you. The donor remembers just having made the gift and is excited to have given it, and you are excited that you've just received it and are excited to share that news. I've found that even if a week goes by, I know some people have this scheduled for like once a week or something, that excitement starts to get a little bit flat. And the advantage of communicating when you have the immediacy of their excitement and your excitement is it can lead much more easily to a conversation where you've just gotten their gift, you're so excited, and it allows you to ask some questions that give you some really interesting information, like what prompted you to give to us? How did you hear about us? How did you, what really resonated with you about the work we're doing? Or what motivated this? It's a natural time to have that conversation, and even just letting a little week or a couple weeks go by can make it feel much harder to have that conversation. And if you have too many donors, that's a really happy problem. Enlist your board. Thank you calls are a great thing for boards to do. And
Hey, Kate, could I say real quick something?
yeah.
There's a wonderful philanthropist in town, and he gives about $2 million out every year. And he told me that in all his years of giving in the metro region, he only got 1 phone call from a board member. In years
Isn't that
and years.
amazing?
It really is.
And
We're missing the obvious with some of this stuff.
And it's such a rewarding thing to do. I mean, talk about setting your day off for board members and staff members on a great level is saying thank you, you know, and being excited.
Right.
So in your next communication, you can communicate about how you use the funds. And we, you know, Wendy and I have kind of thought through these communications many times, and by how you use the fund, you can be very specific. So I give you an example here of, you know, you're serving new families and you thought of this donor because their gift meant you could do this. Look over your budget, look over what you did and in your activities. What have you spent in the last month? That donor supported that work and made that work happen. So maybe in 30 or 45 days, you reach out with either an email or some sort of call just to let them know. And then the impact of the gift, what their gift accomplished, that's another communication. As Wendy said, you don't want to confuse those two or all three of these in a thank you letter. And that's really telling them what their gift brought about. And this is a great time for an anecdote or sharing a personal experience of one of your donor or one of the people that you serve with the donor that they would not get to see because they often don't see these things. So thinking about what happened in a given day or a given week and how your donor made that possible, if you had a really moving experience, is a perfect thing to reach out and ask them and share with them.
Kate, could I emphasize something?
You bet.
So the second webinar on development planning, you remember we asked you to identify how many people or foundations or companies represent 75% of your giving. And the challenge was, it was challenge you to see that it's probably not that many people. So while this may look foreboding, to get a letter out immediately, another month, tell them how we use the funds or so, later than that, you know, the impact it made. You're not talking that many people, but you don't want to forget all your mid-level and smaller donors as well. So you could take these same strategies, you just cast them out in a different way through an e-blast or something like that. But what you want is for the donor to really recognize, oh, I made that gift of $100. That's the place that I know where my money is going, and I know what the impact it's making. You want it to be next time it's their season of giving or they're in the mood to give, they see that it's a no-brainer to give to your organization because you truly are informing them of what's happening with their dollars.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing on that point, Wendy. So sometimes I get the question, well, do we have to stage these communications for each donor at the mid-level tier? You know, so everybody's on a different cycle, and you don't. You can just think about, I mean, the thank you should be personalized, of course, to every donor. But if you're sending out a regular schedule of communications or e-blasts, you just want to make sure to insert these and cycle these types of things, explaining what impact you've had, what the experience has been with the organization, and how the funds have been used. So you can integrate that, as Wendy said, into your original communications calendar.
Great.
So some general principles for communications. One of them is, and we're going to cover each of these in a little bit more detail in subsequent slides, but avoiding empty language. I find this set of principles on this slide particularly helpful in revising written communication. So you've written an appeal, and you can use this as a pretty good checklist to go back and thinking about how can I make this stronger? So avoiding empty language, we'll look at some examples of that, what I call nothing burgers, right, Wendy?
Kate turned me on to nothing burgers, and you will be too. It's really cool to watch for them.
Another thing we see all the time is talking about us, about you or your organization, instead of talking about the donor. So often I go through and I see, you know, thank you for your gift. We are using it to do this. We are doing this. We need this. And instead flip it around. You know, your gift means that these individuals can have this level of support. Are we talking about what we care about or what the donor cares about? That's something to think about, especially in one-to-one communications. What does that individual donor care about? Are we showing or telling? Some of you may have flashbacks to your college writing class on this, but anecdotes paint a picture and data doesn't. So try to put a visual in their minds. Try to trigger emotions, and we'll look at a couple examples too. Are you leading with impact? Telling them what their support means. That's really critical. And are you communicating data or bringing the donor all the way into the world of the people they're helping and showing them? Because donors, and many of us, I mean, because we do this work, get an inside glimpse into people's lives many times that are being helped by the organizations we work with. But many people just, it's impossible to visualize the situations that they're really helping with, that our donors are helping with. So a couple more principles, just talking with your donors, just making sure you open a conversation. Talking less and listening more. A great rule of thumb is 75%, you know, the goal should be to have the donor talking 75% of the time. So that helps you plan that communication. Think about, how do you get to that? Learning active listening. By listening to what the donor is saying, you're gonna hear things that you want to follow up on. If you're not working your own agenda of trying to push information out the door and onto the donor's ears.
Yeah, and if I could just pause on that, I think what happens is because we've got our own script in our mind with no flexibility, that we're really missing great opportunities when maybe where they're taking the conversation doesn't fall with your script. And you can be completely lost. So you just got to learn to go with the flow and go with what your donor's talking to you about.
Yeah, and that's going to tell you where your script should have been, right? I mean, that's what you want to be doing, is getting that information and understanding that, so that you're really connecting. And a way to do that is to ask probing questions. Seeking their opinion on things, asking what they think about something that you've just done or an experience that you've just witnessed with your organization, or a challenge that you're trying to navigate. There's a lot of good reasons to engage your donors with questions.
I had a client who just refused to check in on their donors during the COVID. And I'm like, why? And it was actually some board members, I have to say. I'm like, why would you not want to check in to see how your donors are doing during, and they just like, it didn't feel natural. But it's another piece that's really important. You know, you care, they want to be known and valued. And part of that is, hey, how are you all faring right now? Here's the Nothing Burgers. You're going to love this.
Yeah. Okay. So Nothing Burgers. There's a certain type of language that we see overused, and I know you guys all do as well. I call it Nothing Burgers, and it's just words that don't actually have very much content inside of it. So we've listed a few of them here. I bet any one of you can come up with a dozen more within a few minutes. But things like provide new experiences, or decrease maternal stress, or improve their future, provide navigation assistance. What do these things mean? We're leaving it up to the donor's imagination to guess at what that means. When in fact we could show them, and show them much more powerfully. So avoiding generalizations, empty language, or what I call sector speak. Sector speak is okay for some donors, especially grantors sometimes. But things like providing new experiences, you need to really lay those out so donors can see what they're relating to. So we've given some examples. I'm not going to go over them all in detail, but if you look at each one of these, like just this top one, providing new experiences, this came from an organization we work with where children go to camp. City kids go to their first in the woods camp experience. And telling a donor that camp is a new experience for this child is a far cry from explaining that this child had never before seen a live frog, and that was really world changing. I mean, or that there are children who live within miles of the Mississippi and have never actually seen the river. Those sort of images stay with your donors. And explaining the situation. So I'll leave you to look through some of these. These are all from real organizations, but really laying out what the experience of the peoples that are being helped is, instead of using Nothing Burgers. So
I just want to say I'm personally disturbed by the decreasing maternal stress example. So Kate, you've officially ruined my day.
The diapers.
Yes.
So this is a horror. Yes, this was one that just stopped me in my tracks. An organization we work with distributes diapers to families in need. And a lot of their language was around how this really not having clean diapers causes stress, and for moms and dads, and health issues and things like that. And I was like, well, what does that really look like? I mean, I get that, you know, and then she started explaining to me, well, if you have a screaming baby who has sores, not only is that baby in incredible pain, but we've all been around a screaming baby, right? And then she described the franticness of a mom who couldn't go to work during the week without having a supply of diapers to leave at daycare, which I hadn't even thought of. And so to stretch those diapers, she would scrape these, and this is not uncommon, would scrape them clean, line them with newspaper, and then reattach them with duct tape. I mean, talk about incredibly enterprising and trying so hard to do the best for your child, to keep your job and keep that child as healthy as possible. But what a horrible situation to be in. I mean, that's what leads to the maternal stress. So we want to, yeah.
Terrible.
I mean, it was incredibly moving.
And that's why nonprofits are so cool, because you guys address issues like that. Who else would? You know, that's really powerful. So what about statistics or stories? So Mother Teresa always said, if you show me the masses, I cannot act. But if you show me the one, I can. And if you look at, you know, fundraising for huge issues like famines, African famines and whatnot, where thousands of people die, every year, and the malnourishment is really quite troubling. But the fundraising campaigns for that are never as successful, and this is statistically proven through research, when they show that it's the masses, when it's thousands. We can't get our brain around thousands of people, but when they channel their fundraising and their communication to the one person affected, it always raises more money. So your stats prove your issue and the massiveness of the need, but nobody ever remembers the numbers. What they remember are the tender and relatable stories that we share. So this example here, and this was a story in St. Louis. It wasn't a fundraising story, although it did launch an outpouring of financial support for the family. And that was that precious little 9-year-old Jamila. And as the story ran, she was on her mother's bed doing homework when shots rang out through the window, killing her and wounding her mother in the leg. And why that has stuck with me all this time is we talk about this concept of relatability. We have to bring our donors to where, like Kate said earlier, you got to take them to the issue. So we have to find that piece, that tender piece that helps us relate to these stories. And so, Kate, what one word here helps you relate to this little girl?
Well, absolutely, her being on the bed to do homework.
Right. It's the homework, because we've all been stuck doing homework, you know. Now, let's take that word out. 9-year-old Jamila was on her mother's bed when shots rang through the window, killing her and wounding her mother in the leg. That completely changes our entire message here, because why was she on her mother's bed? Does she not have her own bed? Does she sleep on the floor? And anytime you do that, and from a fundraising perspective, you raise red flags, whereas this had that relatability automatically built in here. So how do we figure out what message is going to resonate with our donors? Everybody on this Zoom call today, Kate and I included, we have the curse of knowledge. We lack all objectivity to know what's really going to relate to our donors. We have got to seek outside intel to figure it out. And what are our options? And I hope you can read this, looking pretty small here. You know, survey your donors. Create an interview guide. You know, talking to 7 people is a representative sampling that you can go by. Create an interview guide with questions. What about our organization? What do we do best? You can list out some stats, some situations, some words, and you can have people rate them on like a scale of 1 to 5, what's most compelling for providing support for you. Take that same kind of questionnaire and do it digitally. You know, we've got all kinds of things. We can use SurveyMonkey, Constant Contact. We really should be asking our donors for this intel, because then that gives us the ability to know what kind of messaging is going to resonate with our donors and which ones that we should avoid. And it doesn't mean that they get to give some input on programming. It doesn't mean that you don't do some programming. It just helps you know what message is going to be most compelling. So, Kate, chime in anytime you like. Sugarcoating versus reality. Especially in health and human services, we really walk a very delicate balance. But the reality is, you know, like that diaper thing Kate just shared, which I very, very disturbing. But did I want to hear that? No. But if I just heard that nothing burger of maternal stress, I would completely miss the whole point. And so sugarcoating things doesn't bring your donors closer. Reality does, but you have to be very, very careful. So many years ago, I was working with the St. Louis City CASA program that ultimately became Voices for Children and merged with the county CASA program. And the founder of that was a real cool lady, and she was a former attorney. And her first, in the course of our conversations, I guess a holiday was coming up, maybe Labor Day. And she said that she never ate ribs. And I said, well, why is that? And she said, because my first case as a CASA here was a baby that had all of his ribs broken. So of course that ruined my rib eating, you know, till today. There's no ribs in this household. And now I don't want to ruin all of your taste for ribs. But bottom line is, do you share that with your donors? I don't know. You know, you have to make those choices, but you can't child abuse prevention is a really hardcore thing. And it's nothing that can be sugarcoated. And if someone hasn't experienced it and they can't even understand the concept of what does go down in some of these homes, sexual assault's another ones, women's empowerment program, men's empowerment program, how graphic do you get? It's a Kate, do you have any suggestions here? I mean, it's a fine line. You just
Well,
have to tell it.
Yeah, this reminds me of another study that was done a while back that showed that one of the people are most motivated to give often by anger or by, outrage at a situation. So you don't want to be exploitive, but I really don't think that many donors understand. I mean, it's impossible to understand these situations until you actually hear about them. And I do think it's important for people to know, I think they have the right to know the severity of the situations that their support is helping address.
Right, and if now things are hurting more because we've got this trifecta going on of the COVID, economic response, the civil unrest, it's really important that you share a real picture of how this has changed with the people that you're serving. So to that point that Kate just gave something away here, billions of dollars are given away every year in this country, just hundreds of billions of dollars. And what it all boils down to is the story that we share. I mean, if you really think about it, what do we have to avail ourselves of that bounty of philanthropy? It's the story. So we've got to give it some power and we've got to make it sizzle too. So what Kate just gave away, or which emotions to use and which to avoid. I started studying emotions during the Great Recession because I always held economists in incredibly high esteem because I almost flunked macro and micro econ. So ever since that experience, I thought economists knew everything. And during the Great Recession, when everything fell apart, I was like, well, thank God for the economists. They will surely know what to do. And I was stunned to discover that the economists, most of them said, well, we don't really know. These are emotional things. And it just so jarred me that I, upon research, learned that every decision that we make is rooted in emotion, whether you're an analytical person or whether you're not. At the final decision making, it's our emotion that kicks in. So in fundraising, there's an emotion to avoid and emotion to use. So Kate, what would you think the emotion to avoid might be? And she doesn't have the answer to this. It starts with a P.
Pity?
Pity.
Yeah,
So
I see that myself.
Yeah, so when we see something that's pitiful, our tendency is to look away from it. We don't zero in and focus on it. And also, we never want to present the people we're serving in a pitiful light because that's not cool for them. They wouldn't want that. So if you want to get somebody's attention and trigger them into actions, just think about that. You have to trigger that anger reflex, because when you see something that angers you, it boils you up, man, you laser in and you hone in on that. And it's not anger that you're truly outraged, although certainly a lot of the things that we deal with in the nonprofit sector would outrage you. But that's, oh my gosh, that is so not right. And so you guys can do this little test and just fill in the sentence. It's not right that what? So Kate, for that diaper experience, it's not right that what?
Well, it's not right that women should have to miss work, that babies should have to not have sores on their bottoms. It's not right that those things should derail a family's entire health and stability because there aren't enough diapers.
And I think, and you could even add some more power to that by a diaper is what, 25 cents?
Right.
See,
yeah.
That's the other thing. That's another little nugget there that really puts a little bit more punch to that. My gosh, 25 cents is keeping somebody from going to their job.
Can I throw in another example that occurs to me? So one of the organizations that we work with that we've mentioned some examples from them before is an organization that brings prescription glasses to low-income children. And at once those glasses allow children to, do better in school. Obviously, if you can't see the board, you're not going to be able to perform in school. But in researching this issue, I discovered something else that completely outraged me and turned me into a supporter directly of the organization immediately from a financial perspective, which is children who don't have glasses are something like 6 times more likely to end up in juvenile detention and discipline and get on that school to prison pipeline. I mean, talk about an unacceptable outcome of an issue as simple as getting glasses. I mean,
That's
to have a
unbelievable.
record for the rest of your life, which is
Right.
where juvenile detention typically goes.
Wow.
So, yeah. So things like that, that's just outrageous.
Yes, it is. And it spurs you to want to do something about it because it's so simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. Remember, donors need a problem to solve. If you don't give them a problem to solve like that, then they have nothing to do. But back to the exercise of it's not right, and you fill in the blank in that sentence. Don't go down the slippery slope of substituting fair to right. So if you say it's not fair that and fill in that sentence, it's a very different theme than it's not right, because we all learned in third grade that life is just not fair. So don't go down that route. It's not, darn it, it's not right, that blank. And here's what you can do to help about that. The other thing is, I am always delighted when we ask people, what's something that would surprise your donors? People sit and they really give it some thought, and they come up with the most unbelievable things. Put together a little treasure trove of things that might catch somebody by surprise that they may not know. So during this, trifecta, we really do have an unbelievable opportunity to tell our story. It's a story of inequities across multiple platforms: racial, health, housing, education. You got to seize your story, because I think, as Kate said earlier, if you don't write your own narrative, somebody else will. And I want to turn your attention to this phenomenal article, and this will be in your goodie bag of follow-up packets. But it was the Stanford Social Innovation Review, which is a very fine publication. And I came upon, yes, my friend at United Way, Julie Simon, sent this to me. Thank you, Julie. And she sent me this article that a better world ahead means shaping emerging narratives. But what it starts off with is that the winners in history get to write the story. And so in the Great Recession, and many of you were doing your fundraising, was it the people's fault that they got over their heads with the housing bubble and they bought too much? Or was it the predatory lending? Was it the inequality? Was it the lack of consumer protections? And what happened was, by and large, the narrative built the framework that we're dealing with now about individual responsibility. And so what this article goes into is that the winners of that got to write the narrative, kind of blaming the people who got in over their heads, and the importance of knowing what your individual responsibility is, rather than all of the framework that was in place that caused all of that to flourish. And what it goes on further to say is that this experience pushed the country into deeper spiral of this inequity, with the clear winners and losers. And as we talked a lot about that at the last webinar, that big disparity that we're seeing just occurring today. So what we want to really encourage you guys to do, this trifecta is really your time to write your narrative. You just share with your donors what's really happening to the people you serve across the different platforms that you impact, whether it's education, whether it's housing, whether it's workforce development and being able to go to work because you've got 25-cent diapers. I mean, my goodness. But think of this as your responsibility to educate and inspire your donors so that they find true meaning in the gifts that they make to you. And in the absence of that, we will just continue to have worse donor retention, donors writing their own stories about you, and it's really your time to seize that for yourself. Stewardship is truly the best investment that you can ever make in your organization. We maintain that if people do what they like to do. If people just got into the stewardship zone, I think we could turn our whole fundraising programs around. But your current donors are always your best source for future support. And while we try to chase lapsed donors, we wouldn't have as many lapsed donors if our stewardship were better. Our retention rates wouldn't be the challenge that they are if our stewardship were better. So until you can figure out the full capacity of your current slate of donors, stop fretting about finding new ones. Just do the best with what you have. And so why do we constantly distract ourselves from, this good, rich communication, genuine conversation? And again, I think it's because we tend to do what we like to do. We tend to stay where we feel safe and comfortable, hammering out the newsletters, doing the appeals and stuff not. And we haven't built a culture where our donors are accustomed to hearing from us. But maybe if we all work together, we would get donors accustomed to hearing from us, so that they wouldn't be startled when they get a thank you phone call thinking that you're just calling to ask for more money. So, and we're going to close out here and get to the Q&A, but remember, a big portion of your funding probably comes from just a handful of supporters. So as we close on out this year, and nobody knows what the season of giving is going to result in, but we do know that November and December are typically the largest months for giving. And in fact, I believe it's the last 2 weeks of December are the highest. So as we get to year end, we see a lot of that giving tick up. So create a really solid case for support this fall. You know, reflect on some of the stuff that Kate and I are sharing with you. Be sure that you tell your donors what's really going on. Throw in a bit of a surprise. And, you know, why don't you start inviting some of these donors for some like fireside chats, or, you know, they're not doing their own Thanksgiving probably. Maybe you bring them in for a little Thanksgiving with your organization and just have a 20-minute conversation with your really strong case. Gives you the opportunity to ask them what they think, how they're doing, et cetera. And again, we're not forgetting our mid-level and smaller donors. They represent the core. It's really incumbent on all of us to make sure that we welcome in gifts of all sizes. If you can get more than one bite out of the apple, take that same case for support for the end of this year and beyond, and just invite your mid-level donors to virtual groups. You know, 20, 30 people on Zoom. I think we've got, you know, hundreds here, and have these fireside chats, or, you know, this quote Thanksgiving. And then of course you can take the same themes, cast it out via e-blast and those more passive kind of fundraising efforts. So Kate, you want to close us out here until Q&A?
Well, that's all our wisdom for today, right? So we will take some Q&A if we have time in just a few minutes. Don't forget, you can participate in roundtables next week following up on stewardship, and brainstorm with Wendy and me on how to ideas for your year-end communications, or how to strategize your communications. We're looking forward to that. So there will be 3 roundtables next Thursday, and you can register for them in an invitation that will be sent along with the evaluation and survey after this webinar. Again, we want to thank our sponsors, the Jewish Federation, Missouri Foundation for Health, and the United Way for bringing us here to talk to all of you. And thank you for trying to make St. Louis a great place to be a donor.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Wendy and Kate. This was another informative session and our final segment of the webinar series. We do have a couple questions, and one of them I know I can answer, which is that the slides will be sent out after today's session, along with a recording, handout materials, and that survey that I want to make sure that you all complete. Our first question is from Jessica, and she asks if you have any suggestions on how to tell stories in an equitable way that protects the individual's dignity. She says that they've just begun to implement a process where they're soliciting stories on a group basis rather than from individuals, so people aren't pressured to provide consent to share. She also mentions that they've started to provide compensation, that they're very new to this and would love more advice. Wendy or Kate?
Kate,
Wendy,
you want to give that a shot?
Well, sure. I mean, there's a couple different thoughts that I have on that. One is, I think it's okay to do composite stories and to put a number of experiences that you seem into a single scenario that protects the identity of people, for sure. You don't want to disclose that. I don't know, Wendy, how have you handled that?
I think it's important that we never present somebody in, well, like we're talking about a pitiful light, but in a way that if they were to read their own story, composite or not, or a piece of being a composite, that they would feel bad about it. So we just have to be very respectful of how of how we communicate with our donors authentically, but also that the people we serve would be okay with how the reality is being presented to people. But we really don't want to get caught. I'm not sure about the compensating people for their story. I really don't quite understand that. But we just have to be careful that we don't sugarcoat it, because then we're not letting our donors into what the real reality is. So I don't know what the long-term gain would be for that. But bottom line, don't present anything where the people you serve would be upset about how they're being presented.
Thank you both. Good answer. I wish we had time for more questions. Unfortunately, we don't. On behalf of the Jewish Federation, Missouri Foundation for Health, and United Way, I want to thank everybody again for attending today's seminar. Thank you so much, Wendy and Kate. This has been very informative to all of us. We'll follow up within the next couple days with materials and a link to that survey that we're looking forward to your completing. So thank you very much again, everybody. Have a great day.